They say the ground itself is soured, that the very air whispers of tragedies long past. Dudleytown, Connecticut, a name that echoes with a chilling, persistent curse. It's painted as a place where families crumbled, sanity frayed, and unexplained deaths became the stuff of local legend. For generations, these stories have only grown, tales of shadowy figures, disembodied voices, and a deep sense of unease clinging to those crumbling stone foundations hidden deep in the woods. So is this really America's most cursed village, forever tainted by some dark decree? Or is there something else at play? Something that shows how easily fear can twist history? What if the most terrifying thing about Dudleytown isn't a phantom at all, but the surprisingly ordinary truth we've overlooked for centuries? Long before anyone whispered of curses or spectral tales, Dudleytown was just a rugged piece of earth. It was a challenging landscape that called to a few hardy souls in colonial Connecticut. And here's a key thing. Dudleytown was never really a town in the way we think of it. No bustling main street, no elected mayor, no little white church with a steeple. Dudleytown was more of a nickname that stuck, mainly because several branches of the Dudley family were among the first and most noticeable settlers. The land itself, part of the larger township of Cornwall, was first claimed by Thomas Griffiths in the early 1740s, but it was in 1747 that Gideon Dudley bought a parcel, and soon other Dudleys, along with families who weren't Dudleys at all, started the tough job of carving out a life there. At its peak, if you can call it that for such a modest settlement, Dudleytown was home to maybe 24 families, give or take. Their lives were what you'd expect for the time, a constant battle with the elements, relying on what they could farm, and forming a tight-knit though scattered community. They were pioneers, up against the same tough odds as countless others trying to tame the wilder parts of a young America. For church, town meetings, and recording life's big moments, births, marriages, and of course, deaths, they went to Cornwall proper. Yet, even in these early days, legend says the seeds of a darker story were already there. The biggest, most foundational piece of the Dudleytown curse myth circles back to the Dudley family line itself. The story, told and retold, and definitely embellished over the years, claims that the American Dudleys who settled this rough bit of Connecticut were direct descendants of an English nobleman named Edmund Dudley. This Edmund served King Henry VII, and well, things didn't end great for him. Accused of treason after King Henry VII died, he was executed in 1510, and right there, the legend says, a curse was slapped on his name, a curse that would follow his descendants across oceans and generations, just waiting to pop up in those remote Connecticut woods. This supposed ancient hex, this tale of royal betrayal and supernatural revenge, is the very bedrock of Dudleytown's spooky reputation. It hints that all the misfortunes to come weren't just bad luck, not just the typical struggles of frontier life, but were preordained, a grim inheritance baked into the blood of its founding families. This powerful, terrifying story set the stage for every later hardship, every tragedy, to be seen not as a product of its time and place, but as another chilling chapter in the saga of the Dudley curse. The very isolation of the settlement, the dense woods and rocky soil, would later be viewed not just as geography, but as the perfect, gloomy stage for a cursed family line trying to escape a doom that had already hitched a ride with them. Okay, that tale of Edmund Dudley's curse, English court drama, supernatural revenge haunting a family across the Atlantic, it's dramatic, right? It gives a sensational, almost movie-like origin for all the bad luck later blamed on Dudleytown. This story, passed down through local chatter and amplified by folks into the paranormal, paints a picture of a doomed bloodline. But what happens when we turn the cold, hard spotlight of historical and genealogical research onto this foundational myth? Well, that dramatic story starts to wobble, revealing something far less romantic and entirely uncursed. The whole curse theory hinges on a direct family link between the Dudleys who settled in Cornwall, Connecticut, and that executed English nobleman, Edmund Dudley. For the curse to mean anything for Dudleytown, you've got to prove that connection. But guess what? Serious genealogical research, especially the amazing work by Gary P. Dudley, who's a descendant of the Dudleytown Dudleys himself, so you know he's invested in finding the real story, has found zero credible evidence to back this up. Researchers and historians have spent ages combing through genealogical records, shipping manifests, and colonial archives. The paper trail, if you will, just doesn't lead back to Edmund Dudley of 16th century England. The idea that a curse was put on Edmund Dudley's line, and then somehow followed a specific branch of the family to America, that looks like a later addition, a piece of folklore tacked on to explain why the settlement eventually failed and why its residents had such a tough time. There are no records from the 16th or 17th centuries talking about a specific curse plaguing all of Edmund Dudley's descendants. Nor is there any historical document from when Dudleytown was first settled showing its inhabitants were scared of, or even believed in, some ancestral hex. If the Connecticut Dudleys knew they were living under such a dark cloud, you'd think it would pop up in letters, diaries, or church records, but silence. Instead, this Edmund Dudley curse narrative seems to have caught on much later, probably in the 19th or even early 20th century. Maybe people were looking for reasons why this settlement died out while others nearby did okay, or perhaps it was just a way to make local history sound more exciting. It happens a lot. When a string of bad things occur, our minds try to find patterns and big explanations. And let's be honest, an ancient curse is a much juicier story than boring old farming struggles or economic shifts. History shows the Dudleys who came to Connecticut were part of the larger Puritan migration and later waves of English settlers looking for new chances or religious freedom. Their origins in England can be traced, but they don't clearly connect to the executed nobleman in any way that supports the curse story. The notion that the Dudleytown settlers were specifically the cursed Dudleys is a fabrication, a bit of myth-making that stuck around because it's so dramatic. As Gary P. Dudley and other researchers have shown, the connection is shaky at best, and more likely, completely non-existent. So the supposed curse loses all its power to explain what happened in Dudleytown. If the very foundation, the cursed family line, is false, then the whole supernatural explanation built on it just collapses. The tragedies of Dudleytown? We need to look at them again, but this time through the lens of documented history, not some unproven legend of Old English revenge. The simple but crucial fact is that the Dudleys of Dudleytown were, by all credible accounts, not connected to the supposed source of the curse that has so famously, and falsely, been pinned to their name and their tough Connecticut home. So while the whole ancient English curse idea falls apart when you look closely, the Dudleytown haunting narrative definitely got a boost from a string of undeniably tragic events that did happen in that isolated spot. These incidents, stark and sad, became the grim evidence for those who believed in the curse. Every piece of bad luck, seen through the filter of a pre-existing belief in some lurking evil, just seemed to confirm that something was deeply, supernaturally wrong with this patch of Connecticut woods. The land, they said, was tainted, and everyone on it was doomed. Among the documented events that really fanned these dark flames, a few stand out in historical records, even if their interpretation has been pretty twisted by the curse story. For instance, Gershon Hollister's death in 1792 often comes up. Hollister was reportedly building a barn for a Dudley family member when he had a fatal accident. Now, in an era of manual labor and pretty basic construction methods, accidents like that were tragically common. But in Dudleytown's story, Hollister's death was woven into the curse narrative, painted as an early sign of the land's evil intent. Another big tragedy involved General Herman Swift's family. He was a respected guy who owned property there. According to historical accounts and local lore, his wife was struck and killed by lightning. This dramatic, terrifying act of nature, a known, if rare, hazard, was easily twisted into a targeted attack by unseen forces, more proof that Dudleytown was singled out for suffering. The image of lightning striking someone dead in this supposedly cursed place added a powerful, almost biblical vibe to the growing legend. Beyond these sudden deaths, there were, without a doubt, other hardships that hit Dudleytown residents, just like they hit many rural communities in the 18th and 19th centuries. Records and stories mention outbreaks of illness, diphtheria, consumption, and other contagious diseases that had no real treatment back then. Infant and child death rates were high all over New England, and Dudleytown wouldn't have been any different. Every premature death, every family wrecked by sickness, could be, and often was, blamed not on the harsh realities of pre-modern medicine and sanitation, but on the sneaky workings of the curse. There were also reports of mental illness among some residents. Stories went around about people succumbing to madness or acting strangely. In a time with little understanding of mental health, conditions we might diagnose and treat today were often met with fear and superstition. In Dudleytown, any case of psychological distress was quickly folded into the curse narrative, suggesting the land itself could break not just your body, but your mind too. These accounts, though, often lack precise medical details and are prone to getting exaggerated over time. For example, later research into claims of widespread insanity found that some folks said to have gone mad actually lived to be very old, which suggests the tales of their mental collapse might have been seriously overblown or misunderstood. And then, stories of disappearances and even vague hints of demonic activity started to pop up, especially as the legend grew and was retold by later generations. These bits, often lacking solid historical proof from the actual settlement period, just added more layers of supernatural horror to Dudleytown's reputation. A disappearance is ambiguous, right? It lets imaginations run wild, filling in the blanks with all sorts of dark, otherworldly explanations. Each of these events, from accidental deaths and natural disasters to disease outbreaks and mental struggles, helped build the picture of Dudleytown as an exceptionally unlucky place. When you look at them in isolation and amplify them with the dramatic idea of an ancestral curse, they create a compelling, though misleading, story of a village doomed from the start. The real question, though, is whether these tragedies were truly out of the ordinary, or just typical of the wider challenges people faced in similar situations during that historical period. Curse believers saw a pattern of targeted evil. A more critical look would mean comparing Dudleytown's sorrows to the everyday realities of life and death in colonial and post-colonial New England. That list of tragedies tied to Dudleytown, accidental deaths, killer diseases, mental anguish, the sadness of early loss, it paints a pretty grim scene, one that easily makes you think of supernatural explanations if you don't look any further. But the real key to understanding what happened to Dudleytown's people isn't about curses or ghosts. It's a word that's far less exciting, but way more accurate: context. When you put Dudleytown's documented misfortunes into the bigger historical and socio-economic picture of rural New England in the 18th and 19th centuries, they start to look less like proof of a unique, localized curse and more like the common, though undeniably harsh, realities of life back then. Life for settlers in early America, especially in more remote and agriculturally tough areas like the Litchfield Hills where Dudleytown sat, was a constant struggle. Disease was everywhere and often deadly. Epidemics of smallpox, diphtheria, influenza, cholera, and tuberculosis ripped through communities with terrifying speed. Medical knowledge was basic, sanitation was often poor by our standards, and getting any kind of medical care was tough, especially in isolated spots. Infant and child death rates, staggeringly high. It wasn't unusual for families to lose several children before they even reached adulthood. So the illnesses and deaths recorded in Dudleytown, while absolutely tragic for those involved, weren't statistically out of the ordinary for the time. Plenty of old New England cemeteries tell similar stories of loss. Accidents, too, were just a frequent part of life. Farming was incredibly demanding and often dangerous work, heavy manual labor, unpredictable animals, and basic tools. Construction, like in Gershon Hollister's case, had built-in risks. Clearing land, chopping down trees, and putting up buildings without modern safety gear or engineering know-how. That inevitably led to injuries and deaths. Even just getting around was risky, with rough roads and unpredictable weather. Again, these weren't problems unique to Dudleytown. They were just part of the frontier experience. The claims of mental illness also need a closer look with context in mind. While madness was a broad and often unsympathetic term, the stresses of frontier life, being isolated, economic struggles, loss, and just the sheer physical effort of daily survival, could certainly contribute to psychological distress. Plus, conditions we now recognize as depression, anxiety disorders, schizophrenia, or even dementia in old age were often just lumped together under vague labels. As we mentioned, genealogical research has thrown doubt on some of the more extreme claims of insanity in Dudleytown, showing some individuals who supposedly went mad actually lived long lives, suggesting these stories might have been twisted or exaggerated. It's also worth remembering that in small, tight-knit communities, any behavior that seemed a bit off could be magnified and remembered, especially if it happened alongside other bad luck. The whole idea of Dudleytown as an exceptionally cursed place often conveniently forgets that many similar settlements across New England went through comparable, if not worse, rates of tragedy and hardship without getting a supernatural reputation. Countless small farming communities struggled and eventually failed. Their populations shrank as people moved on to better land or looked for jobs in growing cities. Dudleytown wasn't special in its challenges. In many ways, it was typical of a certain kind of New England hill farm settlement that just couldn't make it in the long run. Seeing Dudleytown's tragedies as proof of a curse is a classic case of confirmation bias. Once the idea of a curse takes hold, every unfortunate event becomes more evidence, while any good times or periods of normalcy get ignored or forgotten. The stories that survive and get passed down are usually the most dramatic and negative ones, slowly building a skewed version of history. The curse was a handy and sensational way to explain the very real, but very ordinary, hardships faced by the people trying to build a life on that rocky Connecticut hillside. The true story of Dudleytown isn't one of supernatural evil, but of human resilience against common, though formidable, adversity that defined much of rural life centuries ago. The ghosts of Dudleytown aren't spectral beings. They're the echoes of these forgotten struggles, misunderstood and mythologized over time. While the spooky reputation of Dudleytown started with 19th century tales of tragedy and whispers of an old curse, its upgrade to a nationally known, demonically possessed site. That's largely thanks to Ed and Lorraine Warren, two figures who became huge in paranormal investigation in the latter half of the 20th century. Their involvement in the 1970s seriously cranked up the existing folklore, injecting it with a new level of supernatural terror and putting Dudleytown on the map for a much wider audience. Ed Warren called himself a demonologist, and Lorraine Warren claimed to be a clairvoyant and medium. They shot to fame with their investigations into alleged hauntings, most notably the Amityville horror case. They started the New England Society for Psychic Research and wrote a bunch of books about their supposed supernatural encounters. Their style was often pretty sensational, framing their investigations as battles against dark demonic forces. So when the Warrens set their sights on Dudleytown, they brought this whole demonic framework with them. They visited the site, which by then was long abandoned, its stone foundations crumbling in the overgrown forest. Drawing on the local legends of curses, deaths, and madness, they declared Dudleytown wasn't just haunted by the spirits of former residents, but was actively infested by demonic entities. This was a major escalation. It wasn't just a story of a cursed family or a tragic place anymore. Now it was a spot actively targeted by inhuman, evil forces. The Warrens' claims about Dudleytown got a lot of press through their lectures, books, and media appearances. They talked about feeling an overwhelming sense of evil, encountering dark presences, and the area being a hotspot for demonic activity. For many people, especially those already into the paranormal, the Warrens' reputation gave these statements an air of authority. Declaring Dudleytown demonically possessed was a powerful move, transforming it from a local curiosity into a place of profound spiritual danger in the public mind. This new layer of demonic infestation really changed how people saw Dudleytown. It pulled in a new wave of thrill seekers, amateur ghost hunters, and paranormal fans, all eager to experience the supposed demonic presence for themselves. The Warrens' narrative basically handed visitors a script of what to expect: oppressive feelings, unseen touches, disembodied growls, and the potential for spiritual attack. This, in turn, probably fueled even more anecdotal evidence of paranormal activity, as visitors, already primed by the Warrens' terrifying descriptions, interpreted normal woodland sounds, shadows, or their own jumpy nerves as proof of demons. The Warrens' involvement is a key turning point in the Dudleytown legend because it marks a shift from historical folklore to modern paranormal sensationalism. Earlier stories focused on the misfortunes of the Dudley family and other settlers, linking them to a vaguely defined curse. The Warrens, however, offered a more explicit and terrifying supernatural explanation. Their story was less about historical tragedy and more about an ongoing, active spiritual threat. Now, it's fair to say the Warrens' methods and conclusions have faced a lot of skepticism and criticism from scientific investigators and skeptics. Many point to a lack of verifiable evidence and a tendency towards exaggeration in their cases. But their impact on popular culture and on how places like Dudleytown are seen is undeniable. They were master storytellers who tapped into a public fascination with the occult, and for many, their words carried a lot of weight. In Dudleytown's case, their assessments slapped a veneer of modern paranormal horror onto an existing foundation of historical myth. This potent mix ensured that Dudleytown's reputation as one of America's most cursed and haunted spots would not only stick around but actually grow, attracting new generations drawn to the thrill of the forbidden and the terrifying, even as historical research kept pointing to much more ordinary reasons for its decline and its sad history. You could argue the demons of Dudleytown weren't ancient entities, but rather the fears and beliefs projected onto the silent, overgrown landscape by those who came looking for them, their expectations shaped by the dramatic stories woven by figures like the Warrens. Those spooky tales of curses and demonic possession. They offer a sensational reason for Dudleytown's ultimate end and abandonment. But the truth, as it so often is much more ordinary. It's rooted in the tough realities of geography, farming, and economics that decided the fate of countless rural settlements in New England. Dudleytown wasn't emptied by ghosts or some evil force, but by the same practical challenges that led to the decline of many similar communities. The land itself just wasn't cut out for long-term success. One of the main reasons Dudleytown was abandoned was the difficult nature of its terrain and soil. Located in the rocky, hilly part of northwestern Connecticut, the area had thin, acidic soil full of boulders left by glaciers. While the first settlers, needing land, might have managed to scrape by through sheer hard work, the farming prospects were always going to be limited. The soil wasn't rich enough to support plentiful or diverse crops year after year. Clearing stones from the land was a never-ending, back-breaking job, and even then, the harvests were often small. This made it tough for families to grow a surplus to sell or to build any real wealth. As generations went by, the land's limitations would have become painfully clear. On top of that, Dudleytown was geographically isolated. It wasn't near major trade routes or rivers that could help with business and communication. The rugged landscape made travel to and from the settlement hard, especially during those harsh New England winters. This isolation meant residents had limited access to bigger markets for their goods, fewer chances for off-farm jobs, and less connection with what was happening economically and socially elsewhere. As other areas in Connecticut and the expanding American frontier offered more fertile land and better economic opportunities, the appeal of staying in a place like Dudleytown faded. The 19th century brought big economic and social changes in America. The Industrial Revolution started pulling people away from farming towards factory work in growing towns and cities. At the same time, westward expansion opened up huge areas of fertile land in the Midwest and beyond, offering a tempting alternative to the worn-out or marginal farms of New England. Young people, especially, were likely to look for their fortunes elsewhere, rather than keep up the grueling labor of trying to farm Dudleytown's uncooperative soil. This pattern of people moving out wasn't unique to Dudleytown. It happened all over rural New England, leading to the decline and, in some cases, total abandonment of many hill country farming communities. Historians and geographers have documented this trend extensively, calling these areas hilltop or abandoned farms. As residents moved away, the small community of Dudleytown would have become even more isolated and less able to survive. With fewer people, maintaining shared resources like roads or supporting a local mill would have gotten harder. The social connections would have frayed as families left, leaving behind an older population or those with the fewest choices. Eventually, the population shrank so much that Dudleytown stopped functioning as a community. Its homes and farms gradually fell into ruin and were reclaimed by the forest. By the early 20th century, Dudleytown was effectively abandoned, its last residents having moved on or passed away. So the curse of Dudleytown wasn't supernatural. It was environmental and economic. The land was bad for sustainable farming, the location was isolated, and bigger economic forces pulled its population away towards better opportunities. This story is less thrilling than tales of ghosts and ancient hexes, but it fits perfectly with the documented historical patterns of settlement and abandonment throughout New England. The stone walls and cellar holes that are still there aren't necessarily monuments to some pervasive evil, but rather touching reminders of human effort against a challenging landscape, a struggle that, in this particular spot, was ultimately lost to the more powerful forces of nature and economic change. The true story of Dudleytown's abandonment is a common one in American history, a testament to the practical decisions made by ordinary people facing tough circumstances, rather than a chilling chapter in a paranormal saga. By the time the 20th century rolled around, the last signs of human life in Dudleytown had pretty much vanished into the growing wilderness. The fields once painstakingly cleared of stones were turning back into forest, homes were collapsing into their cellar holes, and the paths were overgrown and hard to find. The settlement, always more a collection of scattered homesteads than a proper village, was well on its way to becoming a ghost of a place, its physical remains slowly being swallowed by the very nature that had made life there so tough. Today, what was once Dudleytown is mostly privately owned land, most notably by the Dark Entry Forest Association. And it is, for all practical purposes, a forbidden forest. The Dark Entry Forest Association, set up to preserve the woodland and protect it from development, strictly forbids trespassing on its property, which covers much of the historic Dudleytown site. This ban comes from a mix of things: respect for private property rights, worries about liability given the rough terrain and crumbling foundations, and a desire to prevent the vandalism and trouble that often follow sites with a notorious reputation. Over the years, especially after the Warrens amped up its haunted status, Dudleytown became a magnet for curiosity seekers, paranormal investigators, and sadly, people looking to cause mischief or hold illegal gatherings. The no trespassing signs are everywhere and very clear, and local authorities have been known to enforce these rules, handing out fines to those caught on the property without permission. Despite, or maybe partly because of, this forbidden status, the legends of Dudleytown persist with incredible strength. The very act of blocking access can unintentionally fuel the mystique, making the place seem even more mysterious and potentially dangerous. The allure of the forbidden is a powerful thing. When a place is off-limits and rumored to hide dark secrets or supernatural beings, it naturally makes people curious and often encourage sneaky attempts to explore it. The narrative of Dudleytown as a cursed and haunted location continues to spread through various channels. It's still a staple in books on New England ghost lore, pops up all over paranormal websites and forums, and is a popular topic for YouTube videos and podcasts about spooky legends. Each retelling, often drawing from the more sensational and less historically accurate versions of the story, just reinforces the myth in the public mind. The dramatic tales of the Edmund Dudley curse, the unexplained deaths, the alleged demonic possession, and ghostly apparitions are far more captivating to many than the boring realities of farming failure and economic migration. The physical environment of the old settlement also adds to its eerie reputation. The deep woods, the crumbling stone walls snaking through the forest, the dark cellar holes gaping in the earth. These things are naturally atmospheric and can easily create a sense of sadness or unease, especially when you're looking at them through the lens of the Dudleytown legends. In the dim light of the forest, natural sounds, leaves rustling, twigs snapping, an owl hooting, can easily be misinterpreted by a mind already expecting something supernatural. The power of suggestion is strong in a place like that. So Dudleytown's legacy today is a complicated mix of historical fact, folklore, media sensationalism, and our very human fascination with the creepy and unexplained. While historical research and critical thinking consistently debunk the supernatural claims, the cursed village narrative remains deeply ingrained. It serves as a cautionary tale, though one whose lesson has been twisted. Instead of being a lesson about the hardships of early American life or the importance of historical accuracy, it has become, for many, a thrilling ghost story, a place where the veil between worlds is supposedly thin. The Dark Entry Forest Association's efforts to protect the land are commendable, aiming to preserve its natural state and historical integrity, even if that history is often overshadowed by legend. Dudleytown, as it is now, is a silent testament not to demonic forces, but to the enduring power of folklore to shape how we see a place, transforming an ordinary abandoned settlement into one of America's most infamous cursed locations. The real spirits of Dudleytown are not the phantoms of legend, but the quiet, overgrown traces of the lives of the families who once struggled to call that challenging piece of land home. The story of Dudleytown is a fascinating look at how easily history can be twisted by fear, folklore, and a good ghost story. But how many other cursed places or unexplained legends are out there, just waiting for someone to take a closer look at the actual history? What local legends have you heard? You know, the ones that make the hair on your neck stand up, that might have a surprisingly ordinary explanation hiding beneath all the spookiness. We've peeled back the layers of myth around Dudleytown, but the world is full of mysteries, big and small. If you found this investigation into the truth behind the legend interesting, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because we're always digging for the facts behind the folklore. And more importantly, share your thoughts in the comments below. What other notorious hauntings or persistent myths do you think deserve a thorough debunking? Your suggestion might just become our next deep dive into the archives, as we keep separating the chilling fiction from the often even more interesting historical fact. We're especially interested in stories where a bit of research can show how these tales begin and why they stick around. Let us know what you think. Which legend should we investigate next? And so, we've reached the end of our journey into the shadowy woods and tangled history of Dudleytown, Connecticut. For generations, its name has been synonymous with supernatural terror, a place supposedly steeped in an ancient curse, haunted by tormented spirits, and even marked by demonic forces. The story is undeniably powerful, a chilling narrative woven from threads of historical tragedy, folklore, and sensationalism. But as we've carefully looked at the historical records, the genealogical truths, and the socio-economic context of its time, a very different picture of Dudleytown has emerged, one far less supernatural, yet, in its own way, just as compelling. That claim of an ancestral curse, starting with the English nobleman Edmund Dudley, and supposedly following his descendants to America, it crumbles under the weight of genealogical evidence. There's no credible link proving the Dudleys of Cornwall inherited such a curse. This main pillar of the legend seems to be a later invention, an attempt to weave a grand, dark destiny around a settlement that faced very real, earthly struggles. The tragic events that did happen in Dudleytown, the accidental deaths, the devastating illnesses, the instances of mental suffering, weren't, as we've seen, unique signs of a cursed land. Instead, they were heartbreakingly common in rural New England during the 18th and 19th centuries. Life was fragile, medicine was basic, and hardship was a constant companion for those trying to make a life in isolated, agriculturally tough places. Blaming these universal sorrows on a localized curse just strips away the true context of the settlers' lives and struggles. The proof of the curse dissolves when you compare it to the broader patterns of death and misfortune of the time. Dudleytown's eventual abandonment, too, wasn't caused by ghosts chasing residents away, but by the far more tangible forces of economics and environment. The poor, rocky soil made farming a constant uphill battle. Geographic isolation limited opportunities. And as the nation industrialized and more fertile lands opened up to the west, the small, struggling community gradually faded, its people seeking better lives elsewhere. This was a common story, repeated in countless hill country settlements across New England, none of which needed a supernatural push for their decline. The modern hype around Dudleytown's haunted reputation, especially its branding as demonically possessed, can largely be chalked up to figures like Ed and Lorraine Warren in the 20th century. Their pronouncements grabbed public attention and slapped a new layer of paranormal horror onto the existing folklore, attracting thrill seekers and further cementing Dudleytown's place in American haunting lore. Yet, these claims, like the older legends, lack any verifiable solid support. What we're left with, then, is a powerful example of how myths are made. Dudleytown became America's cursed village, not because of a clear, verifiable series of supernatural events, but because its story was told and retold, each version often adding a darker twist, a more sinister detail. It speaks to our human fascination with the unknown, our tendency to look for extraordinary explanations for ordinary, if unfortunate, events, and perhaps a collective desire to believe that some places just aren't part of our rational world. The real story of Dudleytown is one of human resilience tested by an unforgiving environment, of families striving for a better life under difficult circumstances, and of the eventual inevitable win of nature and economic practicality over a settlement that simply couldn't last. There are no scientifically validated ghosts, no historically confirmed curses, no credible evidence of demonic infestations. As one researcher nicely put it, quite simply, there are no curses, otherworldly events or dark tragedies in the actual history of the town. The true haunting of Dudleytown is the persistence of its myth, a legend that has overshadowed the very real, very human history of the people who lived, worked, and ultimately left that rocky Connecticut hillside. By debunking these myths, we don't diminish the past. Instead, we reclaim a more accurate and arguably more moving understanding of it. The tale of Dudleytown serves as a great lesson in critical thinking, urging us to look beyond the sensational surface and dig into the documented facts before believing any claim, no matter how chillingly enticing it might be. The curse of Dudleytown isn't a supernatural affliction, but a story, a powerful, enduring story that tells us more about ourselves and our love for a good scare than it does about the supposed phantoms of a long-abandoned village.